This is the Black experience for all. Kailee Scales is CEO of Pencils of Promise. Ms. Scales is a longtime advocate of equity in educational opportunities. She is a global strategist, social justice advisor, and founder of ThinkFree Global Strategies. Prior to that, she was the first managing director of Black Lives Matter Global Network and has held leadership roles with Teach for America and EngenderHealth.
It's an absolute pleasure to meet you, and thank you for taking time out of your busy day to talk with us at the Black Experience. And as I think maybe you've learned, the Black Experience for All is about telling stories of successful Black people, people of color, to inspire young people and to help eliminate racism. So you are the epitome of what we're trying to do. So again, thank you so very much.
Well, it's a very big honor and big pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me and thinking that I'm all of those things.
Well, I see the Christmas tree in the back, so I'm going to wish you Merry Christmas. So,
ditto. I mean, in spite of this uncertainty, the continued uncertainty.
Yes. And where are you located, Kailee?
Right now, we're in New Jersey. I am also located in Connecticut, but we're in New Jersey right now.
Oh, wonderful. Well, I know how busy you are with the holiday season. So if we could, I was going to get right into asking a few questions, if that's okay.
That's perfectly fine, and why I'm here.
Wonderful. One of the things I love to do is really talk about, to start off with, is I'm always fascinated about where people grew up and their family members, their parents, grandparents, the kind of influences and support that you got at home. So if that would be okay, just sort of tell me where you were born. You don't have to mention the year if you don't want to, then that's fine.
Won't.
But where you were born. Just talk about some of the influences that your parents and again grandparents had on you growing up.
That's a really great question. I grew up in Queens, New York. So I'm a New Yorker at heart. New York is a big part of who I am and will always be. My family was really reflective of Queens and the people who lived there. We were middle class. My father was born in Puerto Rico. My mother was born also in Queens. And my family, I spent a lot of time with my maternal grandmother, who was from the South. And it was a very interesting upbringing of a meld of cultures overlaid with the Queens experience with additional cultures. One thing that I recognized as I think about my past and my present and how those two intersect is how much the differences in my family played a very big part of who I became, who I am, who I'm still becoming, as well as just the influences socially that my family brought to me at an extremely young age. I was like walking down memory lane earlier today and had all of these memories that I'd forgotten of just being very much immersed in the community in Queens and doing a lot of work in the communities and volunteerism and things like that. So my family was very different. My father was born in Puerto Rico. He and his brother came to New York when they were pretty young and were, in poverty, quite frankly, lived in Spanish Harlem, grew up as some of the poorest New Yorkers, and really had to carve out his path in life. He had many siblings, and of his many siblings, he became the most successful. He currently still works as a nurse educator, so he teaches nursing students. He had a pretty illustrious and successful surgical nursing career, but it was very different than his siblings. And I grew up in a family where my cousins did not have the same outcome that I did and didn't expect to have the same outcome that I did, me and my sisters. My father and my mother had 3 daughters, and the eldest of the three daughters, which I never let them forget. But that's neither here nor there. Or maybe it is, both here and there. I also, my mother's side of the family, and I grew up a lot around my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, who brought this traditional background. She was from the South. She was very fair-skinned, so she dealt with a lot of passing / racism growing up in the South. She had two daughters. Both my mother and my aunt grew up in Jim Crow era, and also the era of MLK and many other civil rights leaders. So they had just this incredible sense of community, of empowerment, and they led us through this path of strong community ties and strong volunteerism. So when I was going through memory lane, I was remembering all of the times when my family cooked and we served our community during the holidays, or I volunteered playing with children in shelters. And that was just, and then, I started working politically in New York, and it was just everything I ever knew. And that matched with this deep understanding of opportunity divide, and my family, I think, bore this. Brings us to present day.
Yes. That's fascinating. So tell me, first of all, where in Queens did you grow up?
We grew up in South Ozone Park in Jamaica.
Jamaica, okay. Because I had family members who live in St. Albans for many, many years.
Oh yeah, I know St. Albans quite well.
So tell me then, and thank you for talking about your parents and your grandparents. Tell me about then, what was Jamaica, Queens like in the 70s and 80s, 90s growing up for you? Tell me about the community, what that was like.
Well, my experience was interesting. I had my parents were very much committed to my educational opportunities. So my experience was interesting. I went to a parochial grammar school. So we were surrounded by other students who academics was of high standard. Religion was infused into our daily, or values, I should say, other than religion, was infused into our daily life. But I was highly aware that right within that community, that little oasis of high learning and high quality education and values and those types of cultures, and a very, very strong community in the education system right outside those doors were lots of working class people, many of whom didn't have those same opportunities. There were schools very close to where we were that were over-policed and had metal detectors and things that I didn't experience. And I knew then that it was strange. I knew that there wasn't much difference between me. There was no difference between me and many of those students, but I also knew that there was this perception of outcome for me versus this perception of outcome for them. And it always felt very unfair, especially given what I said earlier about my family, my own flesh and blood cousins who had similar projection of outcome. And they were really no different than me, right? It was like my father versus my aunt. Like had the same background, they had the same lineage. So they were really no different than me. And it was always really strange that it was such a great divide in the way that I experienced my upbringing. And then I went to an all-girls Catholic high school, one of the best in New York or in the country. And those experiences showed an even greater divide, because that was the first time where I was in an environment with different types of people from Queens, right? So Queens is very segregated, and you have very different, lots of cultures, but they're all kind of in their little enclave. And that was replicated in my high school setting. It was an all-girls school. So there was that great equalizer, which really played a role in the way that I saw myself and in the way I saw myself in the world. But it was not the same. We were all very different culturally, and there were the enclaves, those little segregated pods were replicated within the school. And that really, really impacted me to watch. I did not. My group was very much integrated, a multicultural background that all my friends had, but it was a choice. And I remember then that I had to actually make that choice, that I could have, that they were all around me were homogenous pods of people purposefully. And I always found that strange as well. So that's sort of a brief, insight to what my surroundings were.
No, thank you for sharing that. And I'm curious because you mentioned Martin Luther King, and you talk about your grandmother and talking about some of the civil rights and so on. Tell me how your dad, being from Puerto Rico, how did he sort of embrace sort of the Black experience, and then in terms of bringing sort of Puerto Rican history and heritage to the table? How did that sort of work?
Oh, that's a great question. I'm so glad you asked that. No one ever asks me that. And that's a really big part of my upbringing too. So in Puerto Rico, the history of Puerto Rico, my dad was very clear about teaching me at a very young age about the history of Puerto Rico and how the history of Puerto Rico really replicated that of the United States. So there was an indigenous people, the Taino people, who were colonized. It's still a colony. It's another conversation for another day. The longest and only colony on this earth.
Yes.
Whatever. But it was colonized and slaves were brought in. And so as a result, the people of Puerto Rico are descendants of indigenous people, colonizers, and slaves. And so he was very clear with me that there's not a lot of difference between the people of Puerto Rico and the people of America. There are Black Puerto Ricans, there are white Puerto Ricans, there are all types, there's indigenous Puerto Ricans. And so he considered himself a Black Puerto Rican. And so when we were taught about our culture, so he was fully immersed in that civil rights era and in all of the things that my mother and my aunt and other people in their generation fought for. And they were both very influential in making sure that I knew those lessons, that I knew all my history, that I knew all those lessons about people and the way that we were perceived in this world and what we had to do in order to get to ensure our birthright. So, they instilled in me that we were all born equal, but some of us had to fight harder for equality.
No, that's interesting because I don't have to tell you, preaching to the choir, but certainly Black American history is, other than slavery, there's nothing in the history books really about us. And certainly the history of Puerto Rico falls into that same category, doesn't it?
It really does. So I was very grateful that at a very young age, as long as I can remember, my father taught us what we needed to know about how we needed to be in this world.
All right. So on that point, let me just ask you this. Tell me, it sounds like your parents and your grandmother were phenomenal mentors, champions, but tell me a couple of things that you sort of learned from them, your father, and then your mother, and then if you wanted to add your grandmother or anyone else that was sort of important in your growing up. What were sort of the lessons that when you sort of in retrospect were the most valuable?
I think what both of my parents taught me was a strong sense of self. They were both very, very culturally aware of both of their backgrounds and both of their cultures. They were also very ambitious. So they really tapped into understanding how to navigate the world in spite of its difficulties for our family, for each of them, given their backgrounds, given who they were. But I think really the most important thing that they taught me, and my father in particular, was confidence to understand our birthright, to understand that the world around us didn't necessarily cooperate, but that meant we had to work harder if we could. That meant that he and my mother articulated the obstacles, but they didn't seem insurmountable. They seemed unfair. They seemed that they needed fixing and removing, and that confident my job was to do that. And that in order for me to get to other places that perhaps my counterparts could do more easily, I had a little bit more work to do. And while I was at it, I may as well do that for others as well. I may as well, as the oldest, I may as well carve a path for my sisters. I may as well carve a path for other community members, for people younger than me, for people who came after me. So they didn't have to do that because that's what my parents did, because they were born in this time where they were very much aware of moving obstacles in order to mobilize themselves, because they saw success in those areas in a pretty specific way, I knew it was possible. They knew it was possible, but, we had to tap into that. And my grandmother taught me so much about my history. She taught me what it was like to grow up being extremely fair, but yet very connected to her Black ancestry. She taught me too about her parents and how they grew up and what they had to do and how they had to navigate the world to become successful, to move to New York, to move to a pretty well-to-do area of Long Island, for her to marry well, to a business owner, a Black man who was a business owner at that time, where that was, they just taught me about perseverance and how obstacles were in our path, but we had to actively remove them to get to the places that we deserved to be.
Yes. No, again, thank you for that. And so I'm curious, in terms of college, had other members of the family gone to college, or were you the first?
No, other members of my family, both my parents went to college. So I certainly was not the first. But my experience in college was also similar to the experience that I had going to high school, where I went to an HBCU and had that experience of not feeling that barrier, I did that on purpose. Like, that was a conscious effort, because I knew the value of being in a learning environment that was empowering, as opposed to, I knew I had so many other obstacles to face in my life. And I didn't want the obstacle of understanding. I was very acutely aware that, as a woman in an education system, particularly around that high school age, that's when we start to, back down. That's when the male students start to receive more attention and to start to thrive differently. And I didn't want that obstacle in my life. So I chose an environment where that was removed. And the same with college. I wanted to go somewhere that I did not feel that obstacle of being in an environment where I had to compete against my peers that traditionally were chosen first or encouraged differently, or, made me feel as if I wasn't empowered. I wanted to go to another environment where I felt fully myself, where I could lean into who I was, where I could learn more about my culture, my history, and I could feel empowered by it, which is not the case in every environment. So those experiences really, again, and I know this because I sense it every day, every day since, really allowed me to position myself in this world without those barriers, because I knew that removing barriers is what it would take in order for me to become who I was supposed to be, for me to self-actualize.
So what HBCU school did you go to?
Oh, I went to Hampton, and I studied voice. I was supposed to be a famous singer. Still can, I guess.
Well, no, Hampton's a great school. Yeah, it's not far from me. So tell me, what made, when you had your choices, why Hampton?
Hampton had a very strong, I really did want to study music. I really wanted to follow that talent of mine. I also had this really cerebral background that I was trying to figure out and trying to balance, but it was the talent that centered me, that really connected me to my maker, to who I was, and gave me, again, that empowered feeling that I could take on anything. And Hampton had a very rigorous music program with it was more of a conservatory in the way they trained students. And so that was the type of environment, aside from that HBCU type feeling, that I really wanted to have.
So obviously you've gone on to have a phenomenal career in activism, but so tell me then the transition from wanting to be a singer to activism.
I don't know that it ever really transitioned, to be honest. But okay. In my day-to-day, it's a little different. So, as I said, I'd always really was a volunteer first, was a community advocate first. And that was always like the underpinning, the foundation of who I was. And I always did, always. It really, I didn't even realize the scope and scale of it, until I reflected. But there was a time when I was volunteering for a man who was running for Congress at the time in Brooklyn. And he asked me if I would, and I had another job at that time. And he asked me, and I was auditioning and, doing all the music stuff. And he asked me, throughout the course of my volunteerism, if I would quit my job and come work for him full time as his field director's fundraiser in order to help move this campaign, which was a very important campaign at the time in Brooklyn. And he really wanted me to work for him. And he was talking about being a fundraiser and stuff that I'd never heard of before. And I was like, I'm a singer. I'm just kind of like helping you out. I'm not really sure what you do. And he described this like exciting thing. He was like, yeah, I believe this is who you are. I believe that you are this person who is going to affect the world first by helping connect people who have means to organizations, people, whatever situations that can help change the world. And I believe that's you. I believe you have this ability to connect those two things and to affect change in that way. And I said, well, it does sound like me. Maybe you're right. And I followed his recommendation, Barry Ford. I have to say that because he's very proud.
That's fantastic. So he was, I don't want to say he was your first, but he was a very instrumental sort of mentor and champion. Would you?
Absolutely. I would not ever suggest otherwise. He's well aware of this. And it is because he saw that. When people see you, it's special, right? It's very special when someone sees something that you don't even see. I try to, and I've always tried to remain as connected to myself. And that's what art does for you. That's what, that type of training does for you. It enables you to connect to the deepest parts of who you are. So I always, wanted that. I always tried that, to be that. And when he saw something that I didn't see so strongly, unequivocally, like, this is you. I had no choice but to see if he was right and to see if there was something that I didn't see, because I wanted to know myself fully and completely. And so it was really like a leap of faith to see, like, does he have a little something here? And he was absolutely right. And all of those things, because I recognized within myself that I had two very distinct sides, that I had this very creative, artful side that wanted to explore my emotions and my soul. And I had this very cerebral side that was very much impacted by data and almost opposite and structure and process and system, and asked why all the time. Those two things together, asked why all the time, and would only be satisfied if my head and my heart was satisfied in the answer. And so I knew that there had to be something else that I hadn't yet discovered that would define and align both of those parts of me. And that's what the social change work has done.
So I've got to ask the question, did Mr. Ford win?
No, actually. And he's really like upset. I was like, Barry, they keep asking me. And he's like, tell them you would have been working for a congressman had I won. And I'm like, no. But no, alas, he did not. Okay. But it was a well-fought race and raised more money than any insurgents had ever raised that campaign.
That's great. So then tell me then, once that campaign was over, what did that do? Sort of lead you to?
Yeah, it's interesting because right after, as that campaign was winding down, the DNC contacted Barry and was like, hey, we're interested in bringing on this person that you've been working with. We'd like for her to come and like work to be our intern and then, move to entry level and stay. We want to keep her. And I was just like, yeah, let's do it. And Barry told them no. And I was like, excuse me? Can you explain? Why would you crush my future. Because by then I was fully entrenched in the political world. I was like, this is me. And he's like, no, you're not doing that. You're nobody's intern. You're no one's entry level person. That's not who you are. You are a leader. You must lead. Go find that. And I was like, but I don't have that. And he's like, you'll find it. And I just was floored, right? And I was really floored by that because I was just like, bird in the hand, like, like maybe I'll grow. He's like, you don't understand what that entails. Like it entails things that you are not. You must find other paths. That is not your path. Find your path. That is not your path. You are a leader. It is who you are. You must lead and you'll come back. If you want to, you'll come back. You have to explore the world. You have to explore other things. And I was just like, here we go. I don't see it.
Yeah. So what did that lead to? I mean, there you were sort of, I guess, almost chomping at the bit to go to the DNC, and he's telling you, no, that's sort of almost beneath you. You can do more than that. So did he have any suggestions?
Crazy. No. It sounded, he was just like, go off and prosper, fly like the eagle. And I was like, what? and it was me. I was like kind of upset. I was just like, if you thought I couldn't be an intern, just say that. But it was, again, this moment where I just did not know what he was talking about, but I just was like, I have to figure out what he's talking about. Like, I have to see this part of me. How could I not see this? He sees it so clearly. What is my problem? And I cannot tell you how that probably was one of the most impactful moments of my entire life. It never left because you never feel like it's something's beneath you. I mean, I didn't, maybe others do, but I never feel like, this is not going to be a stretch. This is not going to challenge every part of me. This is not going to tap into something that I don't know about myself. I always feel that way to this day. But what has changed is that I know that I can. I know that there's nothing that stops me but me. Yeah. And so after that, when he said that, I was like, oh, well, I guess I'm on the job hunt. And so, so there I was, like, because I was just committed to this new pathway of life. And I was just like, all right, well, now I have to like find a job. And I also knew that compromising what I needed, I had to take a beat and understand what that experience taught me, what I learned, how I grew, who I was, and center back that art side, like that creative, like I had to center back and then to myself, and then know that I couldn't compromise because of all the things he said, because I wouldn't be happy, because I wouldn't be fulfilled, because I'd feel as if I needed to do more. And that's what I've been bringing ever since.
So I'm curious, at that moment, after the experience with Mr. Ford, and he sort of said, go, be free, be a leader, and you're not sure what that really entails, what kind of counsel did you get from your parents? I'm curious.
My parents were just like, find something that makes you thrive. You'll do it. My parents have always gave me the same type of sense of confidence, sense of achievement that other mentors have given me. They were always like, you are smart, you are talent, you are life, you can do whatever you want, just figure it out. No one could tell me what. No one ever said this. That's interesting, and it was very interesting because I know others may have the experience where people are more directive in their outcome. And I don't know if that's a good or bad thing. I didn't have a lot of, anyone who made me feel as if I had to do something. I didn't have anyone who was like, this is better than this, or try this, not this. Like, I didn't have a lot of that in my life. My parents, my mentors, they were always like, you are your potential. It is you. You will self-actualize. You will achieve all of your goals. You define those. Go do it. My parents were the same as Barry. They're like, sounds right. Go ahead. Tell us, report back.
Yes. Okay. No. So then what was that first job that, for better or for worse, what was that first job like? Or what was that first job?
So that first job was I actually started entry level, but not for long, not for long. I actually started entry level at the Muscular Dystrophy Association, which at the time was a big deal. It was like one of the preeminent organizations, one that everyone had heard of, a household name. And it was like a blind interview. I was like, all right, well, I guess I'm out here in these streets. I better go to a temp agency, try to get a temp job. And which I did. And the person who interviewed me was like, are you interested in something more than just temp? I'm like, yeah, but give me some ideas. And she's like, I'm going to send you to this place, but I can't tell you where it is. And, it was a blind, I don't know if they still do this, but it was this blind interview where I wasn't allowed to know the organization that I was interviewing for. I don't really know why, but I was sent to this blind interview. And when I arrived, I found out it was MDA, and it was for an entry level role, which I got. And, that in itself really showed me, and it wasn't a long period of time in between that and Barry Ford. It was maybe a few months. So it really underscored, validated what people were saying. And it slowly started to build that awareness, like, oh, maybe he was right. Oh, maybe there was more. Oh, maybe I shouldn't compromise. Oh, maybe I'll find my path, And it started to validate all of those things.
And how long were you there for?
I was there for approximately 4 years. In that role, I was an entry-level fundraiser. And I recently reconnected with one of my prior bosses, coincidentally, at my current role, and was reminded of that spirit that I brought into that role. So because I was entry-level, there were many of us at my role, and I quickly became restless. I quickly felt like, there's more. I need to do more. I could be doing more. And so I went to those bosses and I was like, yeah, I think I'm being underutilized. And they were like, what? Young woman?
That's great. That's great. That's great.
They're like, we thought you were going to come in here with like your report of things that you've done this week. I'm like, no. Yeah, that's easy. But I feel like you're wasting my time and yours. And so they were like, what would you suggest you do? And so I gave them suggestions. I was like, I want to do this. I want to do this. I want to, fundraise more. I want to start things. And they were like, go ahead. Once again, no direction. You're like, carry on. And so, so I did. So I went ahead and did. Yeah. And I started this event, too, actually, which was pretty unprecedented. Most people in my role, where we were fundraisers to help fund 43 neuromuscular diseases, as well as Lou Gehrig's disease, ALS, we were fundraisers. So we carried on grandfathered events and we fundraised within the MDA community, and we raised our little bits of money and started our auctions and things like that. But I was like, no. This has to be different. So I started two new events, which hadn't happened in, I don't even know how long. And one of them was the most successful event that the organization had ever had in its 50-year history. Most events raised, the most successful ones raised nearly $1 million. At the end of my 4 years, the event that I started raised about $8 million. Wow. For ALS for ALS research, in particular, funding 2 research teams at Johns Hopkins and Columbia University. And it was a really, really big deal. And I met incredible people along the way. I worked very closely with the Wall Street community, with the airline industry, who were experiencing the reverberation of some of their most prized being diagnosed with ALS. And so I was taught many, many lessons during that of, fortitude, of ambition, of empathy, grounding in that emotional piece, because the ALS is a terminal illness. So I watched many of my colleagues and people that I work with pass from the disease during my tenure. So it still grounded me in the heart, while I moved in the head to raise millions and millions and millions of dollars. And it was a very, 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 very big deal. And again, I was validated. I was like, oh, okay, check.
Well, I guess your bosses must have said, why didn't this young lady knock on our door a lot sooner?
They were confused. They're like, who, like, and these are all white spaces. So this is a very interesting, I had that freedom, I had that freedom of not realizing, of not caring, of not feeling limited. I was just like, this is me. This is my gifts. This is what I bring. To get your money's worth. And I was quickly promoted. I had my own office, my own team, so within a year I had my own staff. I was executive director. I had, budget to raise, all of these things. My bosses were just like, didn't know. They were just like, what is this? This force, this energy.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
So we moved back. It was very interesting for them.
So what sort of then led from that? Because I want to make sure we capture, some of your things you're doing now. But in terms of being the first managing director of Black Lives Matter, going from what you were doing, as a fundraiser for what you were doing, Lou Gehrig's disease, that transition, how long did that take, and what drew you to Black Lives Matter?
Oh, you're asking me math. Many
approximately.
Years.
Yeah, approximately.
Many years, a decade and a half probably, of time spent. During that time, I worked for several progressive organizations. I transitioned to work globally. So at a very young age, I learned to zoom out, like I said, and ask a lot of why. And I knew that, if I could have an impact in my community, then I could have an impact in New York, then I can have an impact in the country, then I can have an impact in the world. And so it was very important for me to transition from working, focused in the community to focused globally, because I knew that there were people all over the world that needed support, that needed help. And I was also able to work on several different progressive issues, like with this underscoring of equity. So I was able to work in early childhood education and education equity. I was able to work in climate equity. I was able to work with entrepreneurs in post-conflict countries and help them to build their businesses and to attract tenders from international agencies. So I worked for the Queen of Sweden. So my responsibilities just came bigger and bigger and bigger. And my vantage point of the world became bigger and bigger and bigger. And I started to see inequity everywhere. I started to see the impact of colonialism, really, on the entire world, and how that impacted the way we were affected by climate change. We being all people of the world, we in particular being people of color in the world, and how we were affected by, and the poorest people in the world. We were affected differently by climate change. We were affected by war differently. We were affected in every single way. People in this world, people of color, people with darker skin in this world were marginalized again and again and again. History repeated itself again and again and again. The barriers to our survival and our thriving showed up all the time in every way. Yeah. And so when I had the opportunity to work for Black Lives Matter, I was contacted by someone who put me in touch with one of the co-founders and was like, this organization needs to be grounded in something. We need to, it was a hashtag and it had all of this enthusiasm around it. And we need someone to bring that experience to help build that infrastructure, to help ground that organization. And, the opportunity to work for my people, my Black American, well, it was global really, but Black people across the globe really resonated with me because I'd done so much all over for so many. And I knew that if I could add just a little bit, just do a little something for the people that I connected to probably the most, I really wanted to do that.
So I'm curious because you've mentioned this several times and you've alluded to it about why and the questioning of why, and that sort of almost has defined you. Can you talk a little bit more about why that is so important? Where you sort of learned to always be asking the why question?
Ooh, don't ask my parents. I'll be like, yeah, she was annoying. Bothered us. The way my brain works is that I know there's a source. I'm a problem solver. I know that if there's a problem, there's a reason. Everything is causal. There's a lever, and I'm a systems person. Like I always need to know what is that lever. What I can't deal with the output until I understand where the source is, so that I can control, perhaps impact. Control might not be the right word, but maybe it is. So that I can impact the source, because the source is where the output happens. The source is where the disparate outcomes take place. Like, what is the source? If there is a leak in the kitchen, I know I need to call a plumber, because it's nothing, like I'm tinkering with the faucet is not going to do it. Like I need to, maybe people need to go behind the wall. Like I need to go to the source. And so I always, every time there's an issue, a problem, and in this case, big, complex world problems, I want to know why. And I want to know where it begins, because I know that is the place to affect the change. We can stay in the other places, and many do, and that is very necessary to remain the course and to create that linear flow of change. But if we don't address, pick up, dust around, amplify the crisis at the source, then then we won't make the right decisions to affect the right changes that we need to fix the problem.
No, thank you for explaining that. And I'm going to segue then right into then using that philosophy and dealing with the Black Lives Matters. How did you, the source of the problem, how did you identify that? And what is that problem?
I knew that I know that the problem with the disparate outcomes that people of color in this country and all around the world face is a result of oppression, systemic oppression, and colonialism, which stems from the source of making human beings a commodity. And the result of that, making human beings a commodity, selling us as a thing, as something that can help build systems to support and elevate others, is the sin that this world must overcome in order for us to truly be equal and for each of us to access our birthright of freedom. And I knew that that message had to be sent loud and clear, because the result of that original sin, one of, is that all of us are impacted by that contamination. Each and every one of us holds a part of that dynamic and plays into our disparate outcomes. Some of us are beneficiaries of the privilege born inside of that system. And those of us have to step back. Others of us are the descendants of those consistently, still to this day, pushed down, oppressed, taught that we are unworthy and without dignity, because that is the only way this system could be upheld, is if both parties play along. And so I knew that this message, that is the issue. And I knew that this message had to be sent loud and clear. I knew that Black people all around the world needed to understand our value and our worth and our dignity and our beauty and all of the contributions that we have, can, and will make to this world. And others of the world needed to know that we knew those things about ourselves. And others of this world needed to understand how to navigate that, to be accountable for that, even as descendants, even as beneficiaries, and to pass the mic, step back, move away, empower others, because that is how we all access our birthright. And that is what I think was necessary, and is still necessary, for us to level the playing field and for Black people all over the world to not only survive, but thrive.
Yes. No, thank you for that. That's wonderful. And, thank you for espousing on that and really clarifying that. It's very important. So I guess a question is, do you think since post George Floyd, do you think we've been able to achieve some of the things that you talked about?
I think that there is a heightened awareness that I'm proud of, that this generation is seeing. Some of us for the first time, not all of us. I think that I'm proud that a window has been opened. What I know is that we have to continue to push down that window, or push past that window and break down those walls. What I also know is that we all have to zoom out, and we all have to see our brothers and sisters, not just in our community, not just in our cities or in our country, but around the world, that need that awareness, that need to lift those barriers. So I'm hoping that this awareness that we have has the ripple effect that it is intended to have, and teaches us that we have work to do, each of us, like our mothers did and our fathers did and our ancestors did. We too are called to action in this moment, and that we must, in this new world, extend our vantage point, ask all the wise, bring all of our brothers and sisters in this global community along with us to affect the change that we can to transform the entire world.
No, it's interesting because, like you, I've been very blessed to have traveled all over the world. And one of the things, excuse me, that I think is a legacy of what you've talked about is that how we view each other. Africans, if you're from Africa or you're from the Caribbean, you're from other parts of the world, your view of Black Americans isn't very high. And it's how we tend to discriminate against each other. And that's right, trying to figure out a way how to form this global community of people of color, and that we are all the same in so many respects, because we all come from the same origins. And that's a whole nother fight that we're also dealing with as well. Am I correct?
You're absolutely correct. For me, it's really clear because, as you said, I've traveled all over the world. I know even deeper that there's no difference between any of us. Those who fly the private jets and are in the yachts in Saint-Tropez, where, when I worked for the Queen of Sweden, I was very much surrounded by, and those that are in the most rural parts of Ethiopia who welcomed me into their homes. There's no difference between any of us. And in particular, this is not a meritocracy. People don't belong in certain places because they earned it. This is the randomness of our birth. We are connected deeply. And if this pandemic hasn't taught us that, I don't know what else will. This pandemic has taught us that we are all connected, and every choice we make is intrinsically linked to our brothers and sisters. And our survival depends on collectivism, not individualism. However, we choose individualism again and again and again, and it never works. And so I do believe that we all must look, when we hear about everyone talking about we are all equal, but we don't behave that way. And we're not just equal, we're connected. And we are responsible for ensuring that those that have less privilege than us, that have more obstacles than us, we are responsible for them. And we are responsible to do everything that we can in our world, sometimes big, sometimes not so big, sometimes systemically, sometimes within the material conditions of our lives. We are all responsible for ensuring that our brothers and sisters are able to thrive in this world and to achieve our dreams.
Again, no, thank you for that. And it's sort of a perfect transition into how you became CEO of Pencils of Promise, a global organization impacting people who look like us from all over the world. So tell me about Pencils of Promise.
Pencils of Promise is an organization that is part of the throughway of my life. Is part of that linear narrative of ensuring equity is accessible to all. It is very specifically focused on removing the barriers to basic quality education in this world. So in this world, there are children everywhere who don't have access to what they need to become literate, to be educated in a way that will allow them to make choices in their lives, that will allow them to thrive, that will allow them to fully access the deepest dreams that they have. There are barriers of infrastructure. So many students around the world, many who look like us, as you said, don't have safe school buildings in order to enter. Many, in particular in Ghana, many of the students that we work with are educated outdoors where the elements can upend their daily education. Other students are, or in some cases the same students, are also impacted by lack of trained, highly qualified teachers, because teachers too are a part of the systemic why. Teachers in the developing world don't have access to the resources that other teachers do. Other teachers in more developed nations do. They don't have the access to resources or training or language in order to adequately provide students with the information that they need to thrive and grow and to access their dreams. Sanitation is an issue in many of the communities that we support. There's no running water. There are no basic hygienic education, so students fall ill and they can't go to school. So school's not a great experience. I talked about my experience and how school was such an influencer for me and my teachers and my peers in the way that I saw myself, in the way that I saw the world, in how I thought I could contribute to accessing my soul and my head and my heart. School, in every fundamental way, was instrumental to who I am and who I know myself to be. And that is my birthright. And that is the birthright of children everywhere. So Pencils of Promise builds schools, trains teachers, creates environments in school environments where they have access to private bathrooms and running water, clean water. We support those teachers so that the students have a good experience in the classroom. So they want to continue to matriculate. So they understand how to impart pedagogy and curriculums that allow for students to really access the deepest parts of who they are. They train community leaders. They support families. Our programming is holistic and is an ecosystem of support that changes not just one child, but entire communities, so that those children, those families, those full communities are able to access the deepest parts of who they are and fully realize who they are supposed to be, which is what connects us to who we are. And without that, we are unfulfilled humans. And without that, we continue the story that was pre-written of stripping us of dignity and stripping us of opportunity and stripping us of understanding our power. And POP helps rewrite that story so that we have we curate a world of empowered, strong people, women and girls in particular. In the POP community where we work, I'm very, very proud of our services for girls who are very important to this world. Economists will tell you. They're very important to their communities in that they are able to go back to their communities and help them to thrive and nurture. And our girls experience gender inequality. So girls are unevenly represented in students who are educated, and it's for various reasons. But one of the main reasons is that when girls start their periods, they're told that they have to stay home because they don't have those adequate facilities, because they don't have private bathrooms and things like that. So POP recognizes that girls are very important to this world, and that girls need to feel supported in every way, and that boys need to understand what girls need, so that our genders are equally responsible for each other. as I spoke of earlier.
Yes.
So that because we're connected, because our one experience is all of our experience. And so we train girls and boys about menstruation. We remove the stigma. We provide those resources. We teach girls and boys how to create sustainable materials so that girls don't have to miss school. And the stigma is removed. And boys understand how girls' bodies work. And then children are able, again, to attend school, to matriculate, to go to secondary school, and to become fully self-actualized.
So it's education as a human right. I mean, that's what you're talking about. And that's amazing. So tell me the countries that you're involved in.
We are currently in Guatemala, Ghana, and Laos.
And out of curiosity, why those three countries?
So in those three countries, what's very important about our programming is that we have a very close relationship with country governments, a very cooperative relationship with country governments. One thing to note is that our staff, POP has a staff of well over 150 people. The vast majority of our staff is based in country and are nationals. So the people that are delivering and implementing and creating our activities and our services are fully reflective of those that we want to support. And in order to do that most effectively, we have to create these very strong relationships with country governments and have full cooperation so that we're able to do adequate needs assessments, so that we're in the spaces where we need to be, so that we are able to build schools quickly if that is necessary, train teachers quickly if that is necessary, pivot like in the time of COVID to remote learning or remote teaching or building of schools when children are not there and enhancing that. And in order to do that, we have to build those relationships. And in those countries are very committed to the education of their citizens. And we have very good relationships in those countries. And so we will certainly think about building those relationships in other countries. We will certainly think about what scale means to help bring those services and those activities that I spoke about to other programs in other countries. But that is the reason why we're in those three right now.
No, thank you for talking about that. And, I'm curious because I don't have much time left, but I know we talked about why sort of defining you. But one of the things that is very apparent is your leadership and your leadership skills. Could you just talk a bit about your leadership style and how you sort of use that to sort of, to create all these amazing successes?
I believe my role as a leader is to empower and engage my colleagues. I think that a strong leader brings strong sense of awareness to the problem, can ask those why questions, and can motivate a team to the why while still addressing the how. And so my leadership strategy has always been keeping eye focused on the why, keep eye focused on the North Star, so that our how is clearly going to impact that why. And it is that why that keeps us engaged and committed and activated towards that solution as we determine all of the activities that are required to get there. I believe in empowering a team. I don't believe in suppressing or being, a person who feels that my ideas are the only ideas. I constantly learn. I ask a lot of questions. I like to center the strengths, like was done for me. I like to see people. What's your special sauce, even if they don't see themselves, and remind them or show them something that they may not know about themselves. Try this. Do this, maybe this, and ensure that they have those opportunities to fulfill their dreams and to self-actualize and to center their needs and to center the collective. I don't make decisions based on individuals. I don't make decisions based on individual needs or ideas or thoughts or pain points. I make decisions, and my team is quite clear about this, based on the collective, what our collective needs are. And then finally, I'm really clear in who we are here to support and amplifying and elevating the needs of those who are supported by our work, because that's what we are. We're facilitators. We help to remove barriers, but the people that are impacted, those are the people who will carry the legacy. Those are the people who will change the world as well. And so we have to make sure that they are centered at all times in everything that we do. So those are the key tenets.
So as a highly successful person, Black woman, what advice would you give? What's that?
I said, thank you.
You're welcome. Obviously you are. I mean, what advice would you give to people that look like you, and also women, young girls who look like you, your sort of tips and advice on success and breaking, the ceiling and achieving at an extraordinary level? What advice would you give to them?
I would say that the most important thing is to take a beat and really focus on your soul, on your core, on your source, and to allow your gifts and your talents, no matter what they are, to allow yourself to fully embrace those. That is what I'm most proud of by this younger generation. They know that. They're born with that. They know that they are a blessing to this earth. And they know that the only thing that stops them from achieving their full potential may be external barriers that they will have to remove, but is also their ability to see and feel and be themselves and be present within themselves and show up as themselves all the time. Even though sometimes it feels like you may have to fake it because you're just nervous. That won't last. You will tap into your soul and you will be fully self-actualized within your power. You'll be fully empowered to be yourself. So I think those are the most important. There's no rules. There are no do this, do that. Like you'll go out there and fly, find it, figure it out.
Find your own Barry Ford, right?
Be your own Barry Ford.
So I know one of the things that I'm going to let you go that's important is philanthropy. And tell me about your view of philanthropy, and then as people of color, our role in philanthropy.
I believe that philanthropy has been traditionally, has closed a lot of us out, right? Traditionally, a philanthropy used to only belong to the richest or our white counterparts, our white male counterparts, very patriarchal. And so philanthropy, I've been focused for many years on, again, bringing equity into philanthropy. And I think that, the Obama campaign showed us, and many things since, the power of the crowd, the power of the people, the power of small gifts, the power of how advocacy and activism and change belongs to all of us, and how we can all be philanthropists, because it's not really about the amount. It's about the purpose, it's about the intention of the gift that you give. And it's about really understanding that those dollars affect change because it empowers other people to do these incredible things in the world. So my view of philanthropy is that for everyone to do their part, for everyone to embrace that, for everyone to make donations if that's easier, volunteer, to learn, to fully immerse in education, to ask the why. For us to change the world, we can do that through every single way. We can do that through philanthropy, but it's all of our responsibility. It's a responsibility of big business. It is a responsibility of very, very high net worth individuals and families, and it is a responsibility of each and every one of us. If we want to affect change, we have to move and mobilize and do that in every possible way. So I've learned that I've learned to think of philanthropy and make it more accessible to all people, because it belongs to us, because we are the change we want to be.
No, thank you for sharing that, because you're 100% correct. I think certainly we've always felt that, philanthropy is that big word that you have to be a millionaire or, in that stratosphere to be a philanthropist. And it really is. It's changing the mindset of just caring about those around you, those in your community. And that's right, whether it's volunteering, whether it's giving a few bucks, whether it's giving, you can be a philanthropist in my mind by, you see a kid in your community who's maybe going a bit stray, stepping aside and say, let me talk to you for a moment. Let me give you some words of encouragement. Let me give you some words of advice. It's being proactive within our own communities, isn't it?
Yes. It's all of those things. Yes. And I encourage everyone to tap into that part of them.
Yeah. Well, thank you so very much. It's I greatly appreciate, again, you taking time out of your very busy day to speak with me and about what you're doing. And again, it's you are an absolute role model, and it's an absolute pleasure to be able to talk to you about your life and your success. And I hope we get a chance to talk to you sometime soon.
Thank you so much. Likewise, I really appreciate being here. Thank you.
This is the Black Experience for all. If you like what you hear at the Black Experience, please consider clicking on the Join button to support our nonprofit. I'm Adam P. Kennedy. Thank you for joining us. This is the Black Experience for all.